Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Sagalong 2020. This is an event that I'm co-hosting with a bunch of other great booktubers where we talk about the Icelandic sagas. And I fell behind. I fell out of the rhythm of Sagalong because I was vacationing. I was out of Boston during the drop day for our next Sagalong. Because the first 2 weeks of the month, me and my co-hosts are doing the Laxdaela Saga. We split the saga into two. It's long enough to make a little book. In Penguin Classic, that's what it does. This is the Magnus Magnusson translation. We split it into two. We did the first half for the first part of Sagalong, and now we're doing the second half. And the book doesn't explicitly split along two equal parts, but the split is very good. In this case, the split is a wise idea because the book spends a large amount of the first half of its little chapters talking about people in history, building a gigantic genealogical echo chamber of a gigantic amount of biological foreshadowing for the main epic personal tragedies that will happen in the second half, starring the characters a woman named Gudrun and the two men that she loves and tangles with and falls afoul of and screws over in the second half of the book. The Laxdaela Saga is known for that extremely complexly done love triangle. It's not known for the miscellaneous biographical stories and family legends in the first half of what we were reading, and yet it has been my experience over time that a lot of readers have a reaction to this saga, especially the first time they read it. Very similar to the one that Lukash at Totally Pretentious put up on his channel. I'll try and remember to leave a link to all of these people down below. But he did, I think he was one of the only Sagalong people to actually do his video on time. But he did a video for the second half of Laxdaela Saga and said something that I've heard from students many, many times, which is that they actually kind of prefer the first half because there's no long-term investment. There's no long-term carryover. You get a great, piquant biographical story, and then you move on to somebody else, some other area, some other adventure. Characters do persist in those early chapters, but not with the persistence. They don't persist with the persistence of the main characters in the second half, who maybe aren't as compelling as our grandfathers thought they were, as our grandparents considered them. Maybe that story no longer quite compels the way the stories in the first half of the book are about people carving out empires, facing the natural elements, encountering each other in love and lust and humor. The main story that governs the second part is one that is a little bit harder to map on the 21st century. It's a little bit harder to read it and think, I'm all caught up in this. But that's what we're doing today. We're reading the second half of Laxdaela Saga, and I had Lukash's reaction in mind when I reread it. And I broke with this. This is the Penguin Classic Magnus Magnusson translation from half a century ago. And I reread this for the first half of Sagalong and was a little bit disappointed. The translation struck me as a little bit wooden, a little bit dated, a little bit periody, in a way that most translations get if you wait half a century. Very few of them are so strong that they can live much longer than that. And that was frustrating me because I was thinking, gee, I wonder what I'm missing. And then a number of people gently reminded me that I also have a different translation. I have this great volume, The Sagas of the Icelanders, one of the early Penguin Classic Deluxe editions. This beautiful thing with you can see the pattern there inlaid on the cover, and the deckled edges and the French flaps. Just a gorgeous Penguin Classic Deluxe edition that has many sagas and many tales. And that a lot of people for Sagalong are using and also recommending. I hold it up on their channel and say, this is a fantastic volume. I agree. I go at this thing all the time. Mark at Richardson Reads actually joked to me, surely there's some bean counter somewhere at Penguin Classics in their office who says, gee, every time, there's once a year where suddenly people want this volume more than they usually do. Someone somewhere is echolocating Sagalong. Although this is very popular in schools as well because it's durable and it's something that you want to keep. And the translation in here is different. The translation in here of the Laxdaela Saga is by Kaniva Kunz. And it's not just different, it's better. I think better. It's sharper. It makes more concessions to modern reading practices without doing any damage to the original. It moves you along. A lot better. There are far fewer. It's not Magnuson's fault or his co-translator's fault. It's not their fault because they were using the idiom of their day. And that is largely what we want translators to do. I mean, that idea goes back all the way to translating as a commercial enterprise. That you want your translation to speak as a work of its day. John Dryden essentially started the commercial endeavor of translating literature, and also wrote about translation. That he was fantastic. He's fantastically persuasive on that very point. That translation should be like that. There are two rival philosophies. There always have been, and I imagine there always will be. Do you want the original work to sound like itself, no matter how strange it is? Or do you want it to sound like something you would read in your own culture, and thereby hook you in your own culture? You see that the most popular translations in the world, of course, are the Bible. And you see those two traditions today. You get somebody like Robert Alter, whose translation of the Old Testament, for instance, doesn't read like a conventional thing at all. It carries its strangeness straight to the reader, and there are people who do that for the New Testament as well. Whereas there are things like, the New Word or the Living Word, or all those sorts of contemporary Bible translations that very much want to sound like something that you would just pick up and read in English in the 21st century. Both translations just acting in completely different traditions. And I want to show you what I mean. There's very little that I need to comment about the second half of the Laxdaela Saga. It's all about Gudrun, or most of it is about Gudrun. And the only comment that I would make is for us to be maybe a little bit aware of the sarcastic and even the comedic elements in the fact that she goes through men like handkerchiefs, and the fact that she is strong-willed, she is almost parodic so, she is touchy. There are other words that end in "she" that she is, and most of the men who encounter her deeply regret it or don't live long enough to. And she shares those qualities in common. If you strip all away the freezing cold fjords and whatnot, if you strip away the paper thin conflict between the gods of Asgard and the new religion of Christianity, if you strip away all of that and just tell the story of a woman who, in the minds of the 13th century, any male reader of this would say was causing a lot more trouble than she was worth. If you strip that away, you get the wife of Bath. And we have to remember what Chaucer puts forward in what Chaucer doesn't let you forget the comedic element in the Wife of Bath. And I wonder if maybe we do tend to forget that in this because it's so tragic, it's so stark. But aside from that, I wanted to show you a little bit. I want to use this video to show you a little bit of what I mean about the difference in translation. There is a moment. I'll just give you a moment and see what you think. Maybe you prefer the Magnuson one. The Magnuson one, this translation was done in 1969. And there's just a little moment here where a stranger is coming to a prosperous homestead. There are plenty of people around, including the lord of the homestead and his sons, and a whole bunch of other young men. And the stranger is, his name is Guest, and he is a wise man, a bit of a prophet. He's kind of like, if you want a completely contemporary parallel, because he's not an explicitly mystical character. It's often alluded in the course of the saga that or in his bits of the saga, it's alluded that a lot of the things he does that seem miraculous to others, the feats of cleverness that he does, are as much a result of just extreme mental acuity as they are any kind of prophetic ability. So what you'd want to think of here is Sherlock, the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock, who or House, MD. Where the show very much plays on them being able to just reason their way to amazing conclusions, but the show is full of dirty pool. No one could do what they do, no matter how smart they were, no matter how observant they were, because your eyes don't have a 5,000 degree focus. Your ears can't pick up 10 conversations in a row, all happening at the same time. Anyway, Guest shows up on horseback, with his duffel bag and his servant, who is also his son, and also his weapons, because you're traveling in the wilds, and he meets these people who have just been swimming. They've just been recreationally swimming, which sets this apart from quite a bit of the literature written at its time. Olaf accompanied Gest as far as the Lax River. That is the river in the Laxdaela Saga. The foster brothers, Kjartan and Boli, had been out swimming there during the day. This was a sport in which the Olaf sons always took the lead. There were many young men from other farms swimming there too. As the company rowed up, Kjartan and Boli came running out of the water, and they were almost fully dressed by the time Gest and Olaf got there. Gest looked at all the young men for a while, and then told Olaf which one was Kjartan, which was Boli too, and then he pointed out with his spear shaft each of the other sons of Olaf, and named by name all those who were there. There were many other fine-looking men who had just come from swimming and were sitting on the riverbank beside Kjartan and Boli, but Gest said he could not discern the family resemblance to Olaf in any of those young men. So you see, on the one hand, he's doing something miraculous, apparently, by pointing out people he's never seen and identifying them by name. But on the other hand, the narrator is telling us that he's looking for family resemblances. He's not doing any sorcery. Anyway, no one can exaggerate your wisdom, Gest, said Olaf. You can pick out people you have never seen before and name them. But now I want you to tell me which of these young men will be the greatest. That will turn out much in accordance with your own affections, replied Gest, implying that he is watching how Olaf treats all the men while he's describing them, while he's naming them. Why else bring up his affections? He doesn't know his affections. He has to see them. It's pretty, in other words, when you read between the lines, you can assume from what you're reading that Olaf is clearly demonstrating which of his sons he wants the answer to be. So he says, Kjartan will be the most highly thought of for as long as he lives. You never want that little qualifier in Norse sagas is never good. Then Gest spurred his horse and rode away. A little later, Gest's son, Thord the Short, rode up to his side and said, "What's the matter, father? Why are you shedding tears?" "It will do no good to say it," replied Gest, "but I can't bring myself to keep silent over something that will happen in your time. It will not surprise me if Boli one day stands over Kjartan's body and earns his own death thereby, and that is a terrible thing to know about such fine young men." With that, they rode on to the Althing, which was uneventful that year. And you notice the little bits of woodenness that I'm talking about there. You have, "Why are you shedding tears?" Who would say that? No one would say that. Or earn his own death thereby. Stuff like that. Translatorese stuff like that. That's fairly stiff as English. And then I want to read you the same passage. This is in the who was it? Kniva Kuntz. This is the Kniva Kuntz translation. And see what you think. See if you like this better. Olaf followed him a short distance along his onward journey down the Laxa River. The two foster brothers had been swimming in the river that day, a sport in which the Olafsons took the lead. Many other young men from nearby farms had joined them in swimming. As the group approached, Kjartan and Boli came running back from their swim and were almost fully dressed when Gest and Olaf came riding up. Gest looked at the two young men a moment and then told Olaf which was Boli and which Kjartan. After that, he pointed his spear and identified each of the other Olafsons who were there. But although there were many other handsome young men who had come out of the water and sat on the riverbank near Kjartan and Boli, Gest said he could not see any resemblance to Olaf in any of them. Olaf then said, "The stories of your cleverness are hardly exaggerated if you can identify men whom you had never seen before. I want to ask you which of these young men will be the most outstanding." Not the greatest here, we have the most outstanding. Gest replied, "It will be much as your own affections predict, as Kjartan will be thought of most outstanding as long as he lives." With that, Gest prodded his horse and rode off. A short while later, his son Thord drew alongside him and asked, "Why, father, are there tears in your eyes?" That's better. That's more natural. Why are there tears in your eyes? "Why are you crying?" would be even better. But anyway, Gest answered, "No need to mention it, but since you ask, I won't conceal it from you either, as you'll live to see it happen." That's much better than happen in your time. I wouldn't be surprised if Boli should one day stoop over Kjartan's corpse and in slaying him bring about his own death, a vision all the more saddening because of the excellence of these two young men. They rode to the Althing, which passed without event. I'm noticing that, and I think for the rest of Sagalong, I'm just going to stick to this volume like all of my compatriots are doing. Everybody's holding up this volume. Anybody who's any access to it is holding up this volume. So I think I'm going to stick to this. And that was a jarring thing to not only to start paying attention to the translation when it should be the saga itself that's sweeping me along, but also to very pointedly not have the saga sweep me along. It didn't this time around. And that wraps up the Laxdaela Saga. For now, I wonder if that was more mail. Oh my God, it just never stops. So that wraps up the Laxdaela Saga, and it wraps up the communal aspect of Sagalong. So from the rest of the month, we're going to be doing individual sagas. And I confess, I don't recall. I have not made a note of the individual sagas that are being done by my fellow co-hosts. So and I'm sure they haven't noted it either. So there's a chance that there'll be overlap. There'll be a week when two people will be doing the same thing. We might try to privately Voxer each other or whatnot and prevent that. Maybe it's in the Voxer message backlog and I've just missed it. I worry about that, but I don't worry too much. I'm going to pick a saga for now. It might be one that somebody's done last year. It might be one that somebody's planning to do this year. If there's duplication with last year, I don't so much mind because it won't be me. But if it's duplication this year, then I might pick another one. So for now, just tentatively, I want to stick with this translator, Kaniva Coots. So I want to do the Saga of the Greenlanders next, which in this book is barely 20 pages long. I'm going to check and see, provisionally speaking. If I have an update to make, I'll come on this channel and make it. But provisionally speaking, what I'm going to do is do the Saga of the Greenlanders next. And that's going to be, today is what? Tuesday. So that's going to be this weekend because I'm not going to fall behind again. So there you go. I'm going to put away the Magnusson Laxdaela Saga and consult it only for its notes and introduction from now on because I like the second translation better. And there's no reason to have multiple translations of works that don't absolutely thrill me down to my DNA. I'm perfectly happy to have 6 editions of the Aeneid, but Laxdaela Saga, I only need 1. so there you go. That is my Sagalong, much belated. Sorry for the delay, but I will be back on schedule this week. There's only one thing that might disrupt me, but I'm going to try not to make it. So I will wrap this up and go see if that was the mail. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.